Talmor, Shishin Magachi. Talmor is my home. My family have worked the land for generations. My gran says the island does not belong to us, but we belong to the island. And we must be ready, for a great evil is coming, and death follows with it.
Listen and subscribe to the latest season of Undertow, The Harrowing, a Storyglass production presented by Realm, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a founder of the Go Kid Go network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. Look for The Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, everyone. It's me, Anne Foster, host of the Vulgar History podcast. This is sort of like an ad for me, I guess, for just other stuff I'm doing. So I have a Patreon page, which is at patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter. And that is where, as you hear me say every episode, if you pay some money each month, you get some extra stuff from me. And so I've just started a new thing on there. So there's already every month on Patreon. So this Asshole episodes where I talk about horrible men from history. And then now I've added a new sub-series. I don't know what to call it. Mini-sode, technically. Although this is an hour and 41 minutes long. Anyway, so to the Patreon subscribers, you will get this new series I'm doing with my friends Allison Epstein and Lana Wood Johnson, who are both authors and history nerds, and we're going to be watching costume dramas and just kind of talking about them. It's called Vulgarpiece Theatre, and to give you a taste for what these episodes are going to be like, I'm just releasing the first episode of Vulgarpiece Theatre out for everybody. And if you want to hear more of this stuff / support me and the podcast, you can head on over to patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, so welcome to the first ever episode of Vulgarpiece Theatre. You know me. My name is Anne Foster. I host the Vulgar History podcast. And the history that I most know about at the moment is Tudor England / France, Spain, and a bit of Italy. Joining me are two people who know about other things. So we're all going to have all fun, different viewpoints about this. So I'll pick one of you. Allison, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Allison Epstein. I am a historical fiction author. My book is called A Tip for the Hangman, and it's set in Elizabethan England. So that's where most of my history knowledge lives, is Tudor, early Stuart England. I've also been researching Russian history a lot these past 2 years. So my brain is in those two places.
Perfect. And then our third co-host, Lana. Am I saying your name right? I'm always worried about it.
It rhymes with banana.
Well, I think that
however you say banana, that is how you say my name. So I have allowances for people who have the more British pronunciations.
Okay. So however one says, because I'm always like, is it like how I say banana or is it not like how I say banana? And then I freeze up. Lana Wood Johnson, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Lana Wood Johnson, the author of 2 young adult contemporary novels. The first is Technically You Started It, and the second is Speak for Yourself. Both of which have been described as having unnecessary amounts of history information that adults shouldn't know. And my background is I have a Bachelor of Arts in history with an emphasis in Europe and historical demography. And I've studied a comparative Europe and East Asia during the Industrial Revolutions. My specialty is more the Habsburgs and the Holy Roman Empire and all of the messiness that goes into that. But I have a working knowledge of American history, and I was the president of the History Club at the University of Minnesota.
There was a history club.
Yes, and we ran History Day for the state of Minnesota, the state finals for History Day. We ran those.
There was a History Day. These are all things I'm not familiar with, but that's not what we're here to talk about. But I'm dying to know more about it. But I feel like there's going to be a lot of asides, and I want to focus the asides on the film that we're discussing today. So I think given what our respective knowledge areas are, Allison, I think, is going to be the one with the most.
I came with facts and opinions, and I will alternate between the two.
Okay, because I have several questions where I was like, oh, Allison probably knows this. So we're talking about Shakespeare in Love. It's a movie from 1998, written by Mark Norman and Tom Stoppard. I think that's how you say it. And from what I read in the IMDb trivia, I didn't do like a deep dive. These two men didn't sit down and write the movie together. Mark Norman wrote a movie, and then Tom Stoppard like rewrote almost it entirely. And now there's a play version that's credited to only him, I think. It's directed by John Madden. And well, actually, first, before we get into the movie, could each of you say what your experience was? Had you seen this movie before? Do you remember the first time you watched it? What is your relationship to this movie?
I will go first because I have a very deep and loving relationship with this movie. I've seen Shakespeare in Love probably 15 times. It is unironically one of my favorite movies. I used it as a comp title for my book. I could probably recite it to you right now if I wanted to. It's my comfort movie. And so I will be on this podcast, the unironic defender of all things Shakespeare in Love, because I think it is a masterpiece and I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't watched it since 1998 when that was my heavy movie period where I had a movie theater within 3 blocks of my house.
The dream.
So,
Yeah.
And that's where I got comfortable going to movies by myself. But I watched Shakespeare in Love during that period, and I remember enjoying it. I definitely remembered Kit Marlowe because that was also my ideal husband phase. So that movie I can talk about, but I
just love the way you worded that. Sounds like Kit Marlowe was your ideal husband, which
right.
is so
you mean Rupert Everett.
Rupert Everett
was in a film called The Ideal Husband.
Yes. Yes. Rupert Everett was in a Oscar Wilde adaptation of An Ideal Husband, and this is before he came out, and I had zero attraction to him. I just really like him. But I watched that movie too many times during that period. And so that is the big thing that I remember. And having read that he didn't want to be credited and doesn't like the movie amused me to no end when I was reading the IMDb trivia notes.
Which was interesting because that was one of the things I remembered about the movie too. Like, Allison, when I first heard about your book, I'm like, oh, Christopher Marlowe, like Rupert Everett from Shakespeare in Love. A movie that he apparently doesn't want anyone to know he was involved with, which is interesting. I fall somewhere between the two of you, I think, in the sense of this movie was very important to me when I first watched it because I was a theater kid who spent all my teenage years volunteering at Shakespeare in the Park, handing out programs, like to the point that I probably still have most of Midsummer Night's Dream memorized. And then seeing a movie about people putting on a play, like this was around, I watched it when I myself kind of moved from being more of an actor to more of like a playwright / director of a number of plays cast entirely with my friends. So it was very moving to me to see a movie that was about putting on a play. And then when we go through the summary, the part at the end where it just seems like the play isn't going to work and then it suddenly does, I remember just like weeping where I'm just like, theater is magic. So, but I don't know if I've watched it since then. Like, I'm sure I watched it a couple times since I first saw it, but I'm pretty sure I haven't watched it in the last 20 years. So it was interesting to revisit it and remember like the soundtrack. Like I would listen to that while I was writing just to be like, I'm like William Shakespeare. So the music was like a big sense memory for me. Okay, so what I have is a summary of the movie. So I'm just going to kind of do my best to work my way through this, and please just interrupt me whenever you need to rant or interrupt or say anything about it. But first I'm going to read the what comes on the screen at the beginning, like in a Star Wars movie. So London, 1593. Lana, I don't know if you want to scream about that yet, but we'll wait until things incongruous to 1593 happen. Okay.
At this point, I'm watching it going, I'm going to take really good notes because Anne and Allison know this period way better than me. So I am still innocent and unranty at this point.
Okay, you're just like London 1593. Great, love it. Okay. And then what it says is, in the glory days of the Elizabethan theatre, two playhouses were fighting it out for writers and audiences. North of the city was the Curtain Theatre, home to England's most famous actor, Richard Burbage. Across the river was the Competition, built by Philip Henslow, a businessman with a cash flow problem, ... Now, are those real people, Allison?
Those sure are real people.
Oh, okay.
Did Philip Henslow have a cash flow problem? No, but it's a nice detail for a movie, and it's a great role for Jeffrey Rush.
Okay.
Stakes.
It's exactly what it is. It's
exactly.
Here are some stakes. Here is a conflict that we made up.
Right. So the movie starts off, and I have to also just say, watching this, I remembered what I also kind of remembered from when I watched it the first time, where I was just like, okay, we've got Gwyneth Paltrow, we've got Joseph Fiennes, and we'll get to that. And then we've got like 17 50-year-old British men with beards. And I remember every time, like this time was the only time I've watched this movie, like taking notes on it. I'm just like, oh, that's that same, like they all look so much the same to me. This is, as we continue doing these episodes, an ongoing issue with me of telling men apart in movies when they are dressed the same.
They also weren't as famous as they are now. Like most of those people were still British character actors.
Yeah.
And now you look at it as like, oh, Simon Cowell, 4 Weddings and a Funeral. Oh yeah, Jeffrey Rush. I mean,
Jeffrey
obviously.
Rush, I know. Yeah, at this point I could always tell him, but I don't know if that's because retroactively I'm like, oh, Pirates of the Caribbean. But so there's all these men. And so the first scene is just a couple of these men. And so what is happening? So we're backstage of the Rose, an Elizabethan theater, where there's more drama backstage than there is on stage. The owner of the Rose, Philip Henslow, played by Jeffrey Rush, is being tortured. Like literally his feet are in like a thing, like with a fire in it. He's being tortured by his financier, Mr. Hugh Fennyman, because Philip Henslow owes him money.
They were holding his feet to the fire.
Literally.
Literally.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Oh yeah,
they're clever.
Yeah, no, I'm so sorry. And that's a really important point, Lana, because there's a lot of hilarity in this movie. A lot of things that are like very funny jokes to some people. So
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, that's for sure.
Yeah, and that was Tom Stoppard too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like Easter eggs in this. So Henslow promises he can pay off the debts because, well, he's lying, but so he says he's got a new play coming soon that's sure to fill the seats. Like the way that he can pay off the debts to the financiers to have a successful play. So he's like, oh no, it's cool. We have a new play coming. William Shakespeare is writing a new comedy and it's called Romeo and Ethel, the Pirate's Daughter. Allison, is that true?
No.
It wasn't originally called Romeo and Ethel, the Pirate's Daughter?
I wish it was. I continually, every time I watch this movie, am disappointed that I don't get to watch The Pirate's Daughter because I would enjoy that play. But
it sounds like a good play. So William Shakespeare is writing a comedy called Romeo and Ethel, the Pirate's Daughter. But 2 problems. The theaters are currently shut down due to the plague. And William Shakespeare, played by Joseph Fiennes, is too busy brooding to write. Now,
quick interruption on that point.
Please.
The plague jokes were a lot less upsetting the last time I watched this movie. I rewatched it for this podcast, and every single time they're like, oh, the theaters are closed due to plague. And I sit down, yes, they are. And it's just the most awful thing in the world. So that's no longer a good laugh line.
Yeah, no, I did. The same as with some other stuff I'm reading about right now, where I just like, and it's like, and then the smallpox came through and I'm just like, I know what that's like. But yeah.
No longer an abstraction.
Yeah. Exactly. So but was that a thing that happened? Theaters closed because of plague? I would assume, like, if everyone's got the plague, it's like, let's make people not, we don't know germ theory, but let's just like have people not gather.
Maybe don't die in the theater. Yeah, would be a nice idea.
Yeah.
I think it was like the typhus endemic. I'm gonna look it up, but I think it was typhus. I don't think it was like the Black Plague. I think it was a plague.
I know whatever it is, they called it closed due to plague, and that happened for a year or two. Shakespeare in Love is like, oh, there's plague, the theaters are closed. Oop, now the theaters aren't closed, there's no more plague. And that seems like the way to live a life. Like, boom, no more plague. That seems
it's like, it's cool. The plague is like left, I guess.
It's gone.
But the plague, yes, that's an issue. But the other issue, William Shakespeare is too busy brooding to write. Now, I have to say, watching this movie now, and I don't remember how I reacted as a younger person, but I was just like, Joseph Fiennes is killing it. He is so camp and just like committed, and like this movie works because Joseph Fiennes is just like, he makes the brooding so sincere yet silly. Like he's just like, he's smoldering, but it's like with a humor to it where I'm just like, I don't know who else could have done it. What do you think?
It's brilliant, honestly. He knows what kind of movie he's in, and like there are a handful of actors in this movie who know down to the letter what kind of movie they're in, and they make it. I'm not sure Gwyneth Paltrow knows what kind of movie she's making, but
I don't think she ever does, having seen her episode of The Chef Show where she didn't even remember she was in Spider-Man.
Right. But the tone of this movie, and like we'll discuss the IMDb trivia and stuff later, but I think Joseph Fiennes, like I remember liking him in this movie and being like, who's this guy? I want to see him do other stuff. And he did like Elizabeth and then like nothing else until Handmaid's Tale. And I was like, really, but it's just a perfect match of like actor and character. Like he doesn't take it too seriously. Like his brooding is so over the top, but yet smoldering at the same time. Like it's not. Anyway, so the first shot of him is just like brooding, and I'm like, oh my God, this guy is good in this movie.
He was Rafe's brother. Like,
yes,
that's what we all knew him as, is when he came out. He wasn't anybody. He was just Rafe's brother.
Yeah. And I think it's wild, and I know this is just contractual, that at the end he's second billed in this movie as though Gwyneth Paltrow is the main character, which is not true.
She was the main draw after 7.
It's true. She was the more famous person. It's right. It's like if this was like Katharine Hepburn or whatever, she'd come first. But he just like, this movie sinks or swims because of him. And I think he's so perfect. So he's brooding. And he's wearing, I don't know, I have to bring this up, a single pearl earring.
Yes.
Numerous men in this movie wear one dangly earring, and it's so distracting to me because when they move their head, it just dangles around. So that was a question I had. Allison, could you explain about the single pearl dangly earring, please?
I don't know if I can explain it, but I can validate it because Anne previewed this question for me, and so I went Googling Elizabethan man single pearl earring, and there are tons and tons of like official portraits of dudes wearing that earring. Like there's a portrait of Sir Walter Raleigh of Raleigh, North Carolina, wearing what I swear is the same earring that one of the characters in this movie wears, and I got really excited about it because like this movie doesn't give a damn about historical accuracy, but it's like, we're gonna have this one weird earring. We're gonna make sure.
It's like this is what's happening. Like men in 1593 are just like, here's what we're wearing, one pearl earring.
Well, that one famous portrait of Shakespeare, the only one that anyone ever sees, he's got it's one earring, and it's like more tasteful. He like toned it down for the famous portrait.
Is his head turned? Could he have been wearing 2 earrings?
I can look while we talk, and we'll confirm the conspiracy.
I'm sad it's like you do not have his official portrait memorized.
But
it
this
is not
like
in my living room. No.
But like, if the movie was entirely based on like people wore one earring, it's like, ma'am, that's a portrait of a side of a person's head.
It is hidden by his bad hair in the portrait. So we do not have confirmation.
Okay, but this was a thing that was happening. Men were wearing one earring, and
they looked fabulous.
And this movie,
Sir Walter Raleigh, at least.
There's a scene at the end of it where one character is like striding purposely through the streets of London, and his earring is just like boobity 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 the whole time. It's so distracted. I'm like, he looks so serious and mean, and his earring is just like boobity boobity. Anyway, so bring that back is I think what we're all saying. Bring back one single earring for all genders,
and make sure Anne does that sound effect
when you're walking. Yeah, boobity boobity. So William Shakespeare, he is too busy brooding to write. There's like a little opening montage. He's like writing by hand with his like quill pen, tossing paper to the side. I think apparently there's like little Easter eggs there. One of the pieces of paper he throws next to a skull, and it's like, because he's gonna write Hamlet one day. Anyway, so he can't write.
He's never washed his hands ever. There's just ink in every crevice of his hand, and it bothers me every time.
That was a thing I remember also from watching this as a young teenage playwright, where I was like, wow, imagine having to write by hand. Like there's a scene where he's writing and then he like cracks his knuckles. I'm like, oh, wow, writing by hand instead of by computer. How wild. But yeah, he's ink all over his hand. That is true.
I just definitely want to point out that being an author who has tried to write during a plague year, it's very, very accurate.
You know what? Fair. Yeah. And Lana, was that because you didn't have a muse? Or
You know, I didn't even think of that. Why did you not suggest that all the times we discussed it?
You should have asked your neighborhood apothecary. He would have told you.
Exactly. And that leads us right beautifully into the next scene where William Shakespeare broods his way over to the neighborhood apothecary, who is here being sort of like a life coach / therapist, who's just like, and it's a quote unquote hilarious sequence where he's talking about like my quill, it just won't whatever. And then the apothecary thinks he's talking about erectile dysfunction, but he's talking about he can't write. And there's a lot of like, is your quill? I don't know, Allison, you have the movie memorized. Like, what's one of the jokes?
Oh God, I just fully block out that scene every time.
The whole scene is just like it just won't erupt with passion. And he's like, oh well, what about your wife? And this is where we learn William Shakespeare has a wife named Anne Hathaway, who, when I first watched this movie, was like, yes, that I remember historical people called Anne because that is important to me, because everybody in historical England is named Anne, and that's important to me. Anyway, and then when the Princess Diaries came out with Anne Hathaway, the contemporary young modern day person, I was like, her name's Anne Hathaway, like Shakespeare's wife. But now it's flipped in my head. Now immediately I think Anne Hathaway from the Princess Diaries. So like she has become. Anyway, so Shakespeare has a wife and twins back in Stratford upon Avon, and they very quickly have him explain like, ooh, yeah, we're basically separated. Like she's older than me, which makes her like not as important. There's twins, but he's just gonna like, I have a wife, but like, but we're like consciously uncoupled, and like, let's move on with the movie. And I was like, whoa, that's just like, later on, the wife is mentioned again in a plot twist way. But like, what are your thoughts about the way that they quickly dismiss the fact that he like has a wife and children?
I mean, I feel like they put this moment in the movie for people like me who would be yelling through the entire film every time Gwyneth Paltrow shows up. You have a wife, William Shakespeare. What are you doing? So like, is he a bad husband? Yes. Is he kind of a piece of crap? Yeah. We're not going to talk about it in this movie, but like, at least they acknowledge it. So I appreciate that.
Well, and I think they kind of did that to underline the fact that it's the later things that come where it's not just that she's getting married. Like marriage is not a barrier here. It's that she's also leaving. So I think it's that setup for there's a lot more to this. Like I think he might be a cad, but I think they're also trying to set that up that the departure is just as key to the story.
Right. And it's a time and a place where like, yeah, you're married, but like, and here's my mistress and she's also married. It's like, that's kind of not strange to them.
So kind of a dick move to the wife who can't really have a mistress because she's home with the 3 kids.
Yeah. One of whom is like, I don't know if it's at this time. There's that book. You read it.
Yes.
Hamnet,
right? About his son who dies of plague. Yeah, he's got the twins and then an older daughter, and the wife is home with all of them. And Shakespeare's just out with his one goofy ass earring at the apothecary, paying no attention to his children.
Like dramatically, I don't remember this, but I'm imagining in my head, like lying back on the sofa, like he's in a Freudian session, just being like, oh, my quill won't work. So it's like,
it feels kind of like a New Yorker cartoon where like the punchline is a dick.
Yes, absolutely. And so then the guy's like, well, here's what I'm going to give you. And it's like a bracelet shaped like a snake, which is cute. And then there's a piece of paper inside of it that says William Shakespeare. That becomes important later. And so they're like, here is this bracelet, give it to your muse, and then you can write again or something like that. And so he's just sort of like, what is it? Just like, like a baby duck just imprinting. He just like goes around and like literally the first woman he sees is Rosaline, who is the seamstress to actor William Burbage, one of our 50-year-old British men with beards. William Burbage is the famous actor from the other theater. And so William Shakespeare has promised Burbage that he's going to write him a play because then he'll become partners in his theater. So he's promised a play to both Henslowe and Burbage, which is some double dealing. But he can't write any play anyway. So he gives a snake bracelet to Rosaline because that's the first woman he sees, as far as I can tell. In case people don't know, can you explain why it's hilarious that her name is Rosaline, the woman that he falls in love with at the beginning of this movie? It's
Anybody
hilarious.
who's ever been in a high school English class knows why that is hilarious.
Yeah, so Rosaline, not played by Gwyneth Paltrow, I just want to point out.
No, sadly.
Yeah. So you go into this movie, you're like, this movie stars Gwyneth Paltrow and it's a love story. So when he meets Rosaline, a woman named after the famously discarded, not even in the play, character from Romeo and Juliet. Anyway, meanwhile, Viola de Lesseps, played by Gwyneth Paltrow. And as I wrote this, it's gonna sort of, I tried to write this good summary and it just sort of gets to a point where I just start calling her Queen Judi Dench, because it's Dame Judi Dench is playing Queen Elizabeth in a famous performance that's like, she's on screen for something like 5 minutes, and it's like the shortest performance to ever get an Oscar. And that's because the movie was produced by the Weinstein brothers. But anyway, she does a good job performing in it. Right. So Viola, played by Gwyneth, and Queen Judi Dench are watching Burbage's company perform the play, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, which seems like a great play. Allison, thoughts?
I texted Anne beforehand and said the most unrealistic part of Shakespeare in Love is that Gwyneth Paltrow falls in love with him because of the beauty of The Two Gentlemen of Verona, which is a shitty play.
It's a play with the famously has a dog in it, right?
There's a dog in it, and there's like slapstick, and I think there's like a band of pirates in the woods and like mistaken identity, and it's one of the early plays that no one reads because it's not very good.
What
And
I will
like,
say
Twice
is,
in high school.
did you really?
Really?
Twice. I saw it twice in high school in 2 different productions. One in a college production and one a professional production.
Does a professional production make it better?
I have seen Two Gentlemen of Verona, and I have seen nothing else. I've only ever seen Two Gentlemen of Verona. Everything else has been movies.
This makes me so sad, Lana.
Okay, but the thing about Two Gentlemen of Verona, which I've also never seen as a play or as a musical, because the team who wrote the musical Hair wrote a musical version of Two Gentlemen of Verona in like 1972.
I've lived on this earth for 30 years and no one's ever told me that fact.
Okay.
I'm losing my mind.
So cruel.
So the songs are so good in it, but I believe they use the book from, they use like the actual Shakespeare play and just add songs to it. And it's so good and funky. So Two Gentlemen of Verona. That's
would have been better
side.
with songs. That's what we're gathering here.
The songs are
This
good.
is commercial stuff.
The Two Gentlemen of Verona.
Two Gentlemen of Verona was a money grab. It's like, hey, I want to write a New York Times best-selling book. I'm going to make it as generic as possible.
Right. So it's like, you know, people mistaken identity. There's a dog. And that's what Philip Henslow keeps saying. He's like, Romeo and Ethel, the pirate's daughter, put a dog in it, put like funny things in it. Like this is Remy, the James Patterson of plays, is what he wants. So there's this performance and the queen is there. Viola is there. Viola is like mouthing along with all the words. She loves the play. She loves the theater. Will is in the back, like brooding in a doorway. And she's like, oh, is that William Shakespeare, who is the author? And so like, she thinks plays are the greatest thing ever, especially his plays. But then after the show, I'm not sure if it's directly after the show, because again, this part is kind of not as exciting to me. But basically, Will catches Rosaline in bed with Mr. Tilney, the master of revels, another of our bearded men. And I put here that the bracelet is broken, but no, the bracelet not broken yet. So he's like, oh my God. So he was in love with Rosaline for, in this movie, actively, I want to say 3 minutes, maybe. She was briefly his muse. And then he's like, what? You have sex with other people? Not just me, the person you just met who gave you a snake bracelet. So he's depressed. He goes to drink away his sorrows in the pub where he meets fellow playwright Christopher Marlowe, played uncredited by the very handsome, very charismatic, pre-plastic surgery, Rupert Everett. And he's looking here like he does in, what is it, My Best Friend's Wedding, the one with Julia Roberts?
Yes.
This is Rupert Everett in his finest era. And so Allison, Christopher Marlowe shows up. And what do you think about this portrayal of Christopher Marlowe in this film? I mean, based on the fact that you love this movie and you wrote a book about Christopher Marlowe, I feel like you must be okay with it.
I am not mad at it. It's not a Christopher Marlowe movie, and I get it. They wrote Marlowe in Shakespeare in Love to make Shakespeare more interesting than him, which I don't think is true. But they took out a lot of the exciting, fun Marlowe biography bits and just kind of had him as like, ooh, fun mentor in a bar who's better at plays than you are. And like
Better at everything.
better at everything than you are, yeah. And I mean, like, I hear Marlowe's name and I'm happy. I'm like, oh, someone said the name of the man that no one knows about anymore. So it doesn't take very much to make me happy. Just
When it's sort of like it's not exactly this, and we may for a future episode be doing Amadeus, the movie about the Mozart Salieri thing, but it is a bit like everyone's just like, oh, Christopher Marlowe, he's so good, his plays are so good. Like later there's like a gondola taxi driver who's like, well, I had Christopher Marlowe in my gondola one day. So it's just like this is haunting Shakespeare, that everyone's just like, Christopher Marlowe is so great, and he's just like, I'm great too. But
and I love that this is completely a one-sided rivalry where it's like that one screen grab from Mad Men where it's like, I hate you, and the other guy's like, I do not think about you at all.
Exactly. And that's what Rupert Everett does in this movie. He's just like, William Shakespeare's like, oh, I can't write this play, and he's like, it's called Romeo and Ethel the Pirate's Daughter, and Marlowe's like, well, what about Romeo and Juliet? What about if they're Italian? What about
if anything that would be better than what you just did, you idiot? Come on, get your shit together.
Exactly. And so Shakespeare's like, great, thank you, I'm going to steal all of that. But the thing is, like, who will they cast in this play? So at the same time, Viola, who has now become sort of the secondary lead character. So her nurse, played by, what is her name? Imelda Staunton. Imogen. I think it's Imelda. I think I wrote it down.
Yeah, maybe it is Imelda.
I think it is Imelda. Yeah, no, she's great.
Yeah, because she's married to the guy who plays the nurse.
Yeah, she's married to Carson the butler from Downton Abbey, who plays the nurse in the play.
I'm learning so much today.
They played the same role in the same movie.
So Viola wants adventure and love, and like, you know, it's a very like, I want Disney heroine type moment, except not a song. She wants to be an actor in the plays of Will Shakespeare, but guess what? She can't be. Why is that? Women can't be in plays. Allison, can you expand on that?
That is true. Women can't be in plays. So they did have like all the plays had in the female roles men dressed as women until I don't know how long, Restoration times. Plays got real bad after like the Jacobean era, and I stopped paying attention to them. So I actually don't know when women are able to.
Yeah.
But it was a while.
Everything got real bad after the Jacobean.
It's true.
What I know is that there's the movie Stage Beauty with Claire Danes and Billy Crudup. And that's about, he's like a famous person who had been playing women's roles, but then she plays someone who is a woman who starts playing roles because women start playing roles. So it was I haven't seen that movie. I just know what that's about. So, and the movie is called Stage Beauty and it takes place in the Restoration. So I'm going to say that's when.
Sounds real. That sounds like Sarah Bernhardt times.
So,
yeah.
So basically women can't be actors, but also I want to say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think very rich people could be actors in general because acting was like a dirtbag job.
If you were rich, you could go to plays and you could enjoy the plays, but yeah, it was definitely a dirtbag job for sure. You were not going into that for the money. You were not going to be famous. Yeah.
It's been a dirtbag job for a very, very long time. Yeah. It's only recently that there's any form of celebrity about it.
Yeah. So the fact that Gwyneth wants to like be an that she wants to be an actor. It's like she can't because she's a woman, but also like she's a rich person. So even if she was like a rich man, it would be like, no, you can't be an actor. Like this is not a job for a fancy person like you, Gwyneth, but she just loves the theater and the magic of it. Meanwhile, auditions not going well for Will and Henslow. Everyone shows up saying the same. It's a Kit Marlowe monologue. Yes, they all come in and they all say like,
and that's my favorite part of the whole movie because that's exactly what it's like studying any kind of theater model. Like, here's the one monologue from Marlowe you need to know, and that's all. Yeah. You don't need to read anything else. So.
Well, and that's also in my experience. My experience as a play director in my university days, that is also what would happen. Everyone would come in and just be like, we're going to say the same monologue as everyone else said. And it's like, really? Anyway, so they're just, and it's also Kit Marlowe, who's like, he's in this one-sided rivalry. And then Viola shows up, her hair hidden under a hat, wearing little tiny pantaloons.
They're so small. I want to know where she got them because they are ridiculous.
Yeah. So we're going to get into the pantaloons, but like in terms of like the size, let's get into it. So the men in this film are wearing, and is that even the right word? I don't know, but they're wearing these giant, voluminous, like ends at the knee pantaloons.
I have thoughts, and here is my thought, and it is
Please.
because I hate every single period drama when they do this, is that they give the historically accurate costume to the villain, and then they give all of the good characters like a kind of moderned up version of what that costume would have looked like, because the only person whose costume is like looks good in this movie, like right on, is Colin Firth, who plays the villain.
And
Like,
he's very
he looks
like
ridiculous, but it is really very impressive.
Yeah, it's very like frilly, lots of details. But yeah, but I have to say they do wear pantaloons. If you look at like Rain, for instance, the TV show, they're all wearing like leather pants, like leather jeans.
Yeah,
like
they get closer than Rain, which is like, ooh, 16th century homecoming dresses.
Yeah, exactly. But like they're wearing, I get it that like everyone's not going all the way, but like Will is wearing voluminous pantaloons, and when he goes running, they are all akimbo. They're just like flopping all around.
Pantaloon action.
Pantaloons akimbo.
Yeah. And then if you compare this, well, if you watch this at the same time as the Elizabeth movie with Cate Blanchett that came out weirdly the same year, weirdly also stars Joseph Fiennes as a love interest who weirdly is married, and that becomes a plot point far later in the movie than it should. His pantaloons in that are even bigger, and I was like, oh, I can't. These are too big. I can't deal with these. This is a step too big, these pantaloons, which are probably more accurate. But he also does running in that movie. So just for like in the year 1998, Joseph Fiennes, it was just like, who can wear these giant pants? This guy. Sorry.
I wonder if he put it in his contract going forward, like, we'll run in pantaloons, but only up to this size. Like, anything beyond this is a no.
And it's like, Will shows up in like hot pants pantaloons.
They're like the denim miniskirt of pantaloons. They're like 3 inches long.
They're like Daisy Duke pantaloons. Yeah. So she's like, hey, it's me. I'm totally a man. Don't worry about it.
Totally convincing. All of my hair would totally fit inside this tiny hat. Don't worry about it.
Anyway, so she shows up in disguise, no mustache at this point.
It's a bad disguise.
Yeah. And she's on the stage and she's like, I'm here to read a monologue from the greatest play by the most amazing playwright. And Will is like, oh yeah, I know. And then she's like, William Shakespeare. And he's like, me? And then she says it's one of the beautiful plays from his famous play, The Two Gentlemen of Verona.
Fine. I will allow it.
And then her acting talent is such that Will is just like totally entranced. He's like, take off your hat. I'm not sure why that's his like thing, but he's like, take off your hat. And she's like, I can't take off my hat because then you'll know I'm a woman. And then she runs off in her little pantaloons. He chases her pantaloons akimbo. They're running. She gets onto, okay, I'm using the word gondola, but it's like a water taxi. Is that
Punts? I think they're punts. I'm gonna look
yes.
that one up.
Yeah.
I think they call them punt. Punt sounds like a word. I just called them boats.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like the boats, like the boat taxis are used quite a bit in this film. Was that
a punt?
A punt. So is that was a thing? There were like little boats that people would use to go places? Allison, do you know?
They still do, but they did a lot more then because there was only one bridge over the Thames at the time. So like if you wanted to get anywhere, you would be caught in traffic on London Bridge for like forever, or you gave the dude with a boat a couple coins and you're like, finally, now I get to go around that big old nasty bridge with the heads on it. So yeah, totally.
Okay, so she gets in the boat, and then where she's headed in the boat is she goes to the house of her house, like the de Lesseps house. She doesn't know he's following her. He is following her. And then he lurks around, but he thinks he's following him, a guy, a tall, talented actor. So he lurks around hoping to like see who she is. And he goes to the door, I guess. And he's like, hey, I'm looking for Thomas Kent. And Imelda is there, like, she knows what Gwyneth is up to because she's like the assistant. She's like, oh yeah, no, that's my nephew. He's totally not here or something. But there's a big ball being held coincidentally right away. And so Will stays hoping to see Thomas again. And this is where we first meet Colin Firth as Wessex. Let me finish the sentence, Lana. A plantation owning, one earring wearing dirtbag who wants to marry Viola as a broodmare and drag her off with him with the rest of his household to Virginia.
Which doesn't exist.
Okay, so let's just take this apart. So what What's the biggest
How about-
thing wrong with this plot point, Lana?
Virginia doesn't exist.
Great point.
Virginia doesn't exist until 9 years after Queen Elizabeth dies.
Okay.
And about 15 years after, I think that's the math. I didn't do the math all the way. 15 years after this plot point. Not only that, there's no standing colony in the new, there's no standing colony for England yet, because Sir Walter Raleigh's Roanoke colony had already fallen apart once. And one of my former coworkers, 11 times great uncle, brought them back. And then they'd gone back again, and it had disappeared. And that's that Roanoke, the Croatoan secret message on the tree, and they never see the colonists ever again. So they kind of stopped going there for a while. And this is that period where they just stopped going and trying for a little bit.
So you're saying that he wasn't going to move his entire household to Virginia to oversee his plantation?
There were no plantations. There was no Virginia. And then you have plantations aren't really into the 1600s, like well into it. Tobacco farming wasn't really a thing yet, because they hadn't found the nice smooth tobacco, because they weren't colonizing the Carolinas and Virginia yet. So it was still Philip II, your favorite, trying to grow like the harsher Cuban tobacco down in Spain. And that was like the best attempt at commercializing tobacco, but it didn't reach European tastes yet. So then we got that. And then there's the fact that even when we did have plantations, and even when we did have colonies, an earl does not move himself, let alone his entire household, to Virginia. He has people for that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't notice it then. I didn't notice it till the end when they're like, and now I have to go to Virginia. I'm like, wait, what? What? And I went back and I'm like, no, that's not how math works at all.
So I was thinking over this plot point. Well, you had mentioned this issue prior to when I rewatched the movie. And so I was watching it. I'm like, the distance is important. Like later on, like it becomes, it's insurmountable. Like if she goes to like Virginia, like she will never see Will again. And I was like, okay, because it could have been like his family's sending him to I don't know, Sweden. They're sending him to like Portugal or something, where it's like
if I had
the new
written
ambassador to France,
I'd have sent him to Ireland, because that's like the colonial equivalent at the time, and it's right there, and there's still an ocean in the way. And like William Shakespeare with his £3 a year is not getting on a boat to Ireland. So that was my fix that no one asked me for, because I was 5 years old in this movie.
My cat just showed up, just so you can. Here she is.
Oh, hello.
This is where she sits when I am at work every day, when she wants to get my attention right in front of the keyboard. Hello. So yes.
Yeah,
so this is
basically he's marrying this woman for a cash infusion.
Mm-hmm.
Why would he then separate himself from society? Like he's important enough that the queen has to approve his matches. He's important enough that he's a valuable match for a merchant's daughter, but he's poor enough that he needs a merchant's daughter cash infusion, upper echelon merchant's daughter, but still. So what, like, that's not why you get cash infusions. You don't get cash infusions to go live in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So we need the plot thing of like to put the pressure on, just to increase the stakes of like, she has to marry this guy, and then as soon as she marries him, she has to go away. But this is nonsensical entirely, in I think what you just said, about 12 different ways.
He's also the Earl of a kingdom that didn't exist at this time, so that's fun. The Kingdom of Wessex, which is like way back in the 500s. So
yeah. Did you see in the IMDb trivia that Queen Elizabeth, modern day Queen Elizabeth, her son Edward, this movie came out around the same time he was going to be given his like title of Duke of whatever, and he requested, can it be Duke of Wessex, because I like this movie, and he is in fact now the Duke of Wessex.
Oh boy.
which is bold because Colin Firth in this movie, not likable.
Not the one that you're seeing yourself in, hopefully.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
he's okay. So Colin Firth, this was interesting as well because the trajectory of Colin Firth's career was he was just kind of like another British guy, and then suddenly he was Mr. Darcy in the Pride and Prejudice thing, and then suddenly everyone became obsessed with him. Bridget Jones, like more people became obsessed with him. He's in Love Actually, like. So I found it interesting. I have to assume he auditioned to play Will Shakespeare in this and did not get it. And then he got this part instead. Because he's the similar-ish age. But just to see him playing not the hero was interesting to me.
I think Colin Firth's comedy acting is underrated generally.
He was very good. He's definitely very good.
He's doing the same kind of business in Shakespeare in Love that he's doing in like Kingsman. And I love that for him.
Just sort of fussy person.
People should let Colin Firth have more fun. That's my opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And maybe that's like, I don't know, Lena, I think you know better than I do, the trajectory of like him, he's like becoming a heartthrob and then turning into a character actor. Like this feels like he never wanted to be the like brooding Mr. Darcy. Was this a sort of role maybe he wanted to be doing? I just found it interesting that
I think your timing is a little bit off because he did Pride and Prejudice in 1995, and I'm old enough that I remember that no one knew it existed. It was one of those, came out on VHS, and all of us quiet nerds started passing the VHS around. And that's how it kind of built up, but not until it wasn't an insta famous hit like a lot of the movies are. It kind of like was a slow build. And then he had like some background roles, and then he did Shakespeare in Love, and then like I think Bridget Jones' Diary came out at about the same time, and she had gotten the VHS, and it was Bridget Jones' Diary that made the Pride and Prejudice Darcy a lot more famous than it was.
Right, because Bridget Jones herself is like the part where he dives in the lake. Like that's like a plot point in Bridget Jones. Everyone likes watching that scene in the book. Mm-hmm. And then it was sort of
and
like
the book was written around his Darcy. So he's playing the character that inspired the character that was inspired by his character in a show that not many people had watched as much yet.
Okay, so Bridget Jones kind of brought that. Okay, yeah, the trajectory was not familiar to me, but it was just I was just like the 90s. That's when Colin Firth was like Mr. Darcy. How weird he did this movie, but I see. Okay, he wasn't, except in England.
He wasn't insta famous.
Got it.
Perhaps in England, but this was a Miramax, and that's indie. Like that's indie. How you get an Academy Award movie? You'll do pretty much anything to get in those back then,
for sure.
Which is sad. And
the Miramax of it all. We don't need to get into that.
Yes.
So Wessex, he is odious. He is awful. He is from the Disney's Pocahontas movie, like that villain. He is that guy. He is just kind of like, here's what I need to, like, he's all but mustache twirling. I think he might have actually twirled his mustache. But you have to be at that level because your love rival in this triangle is Joseph Fiennes, who's like wrapping himself around pillars, like looking longingly at Gwyneth Paltrow.
He drapes himself over every single piece of scenery in this film. And it's amazing.
He's so good in this movie. Okay, so we're at this ball. Will is looking for Thomas, who he wants to cast as Romeo, but then he sees Viola, who he doesn't realize is also Thomas. And she's dressed as a woman, and it's Gwyneth, and her long curly blonde hair and her gold dress. And then he's like, wait, and because he still needs a muse, you know, he imprinted on Rosalind, that didn't work out. He sees her, and then they do this switching partners dance, like in Romeo and Juliet, and like in every movie version of Pride and Prejudice, the thing where you're switching partners, and you get to the person who you're like attracted to, and then you like have longing gazes at each other, and then you switch partners. So it's a romantic switching partners dance, and they make smoldery eyes at each other. And she's like, wait, are you, oh my God, you're William Shakespeare. Like I saw you, I love your plays. And he's just like, you're a beautiful woman. Colin Firth is jealous. He sees them smoldering at each other, and he's like, he grabs Will and he's like, what's your name? And Will is like, Christopher Marlowe, and runs away. And at this point, funny joke, because we don't know how that's going to build. And I like how that builds, him saying he's Christopher Marlowe and then what that turns into.
Can I also say that at this scene, Will Shakespeare is wildly underdressed for this party. He is still wearing the same clothes that he basically fell into like a pile of manure in earlier in this film. And the fact that no one is like, maybe he shouldn't be dancing with the Queen's best friend is like stunning to me. But
I didn't even think about that, but you're right. He's in his like muddy pantaloons, sort of like an off the shoulder white blouse with
Bill
like
has not washed his hands since the beginning of this
ink
movie.
all over. He's just
No one washed their hands.
To be fair, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
By
why
the plague.
plague got so bad. Anyway, so he runs away from the ball, but only as far as outside the ball, where Viola, I guess, time has passed. He's just been lurking there because now it's night. The ball is over. Her hair is down. She stands on her balcony, and I like this part. She's like, Romeo. What does she say? She's like, Romeo, a play by William Shakespeare. It made me laugh. Anyway, so then he's like, oh my God, it's me. And then they like basically do the Romeo and Juliet scene, but it's them and it's real life until eventually Imelda, the nurse, sees Will, screams, Will falls down into some bushes, and then he escapes back home via the punts. And then he's up all night handwriting with his quill pen because the play is now Romeo and Juliet, a comedy, and it's being inspired by he's now in love with Viola, the woman who he talked to on the balcony. So things are going well for him writing wise, but Henslow is threatened by the money guys again, because how can he do this play if the theaters are closed due to plague? And this part, Allison, can you talk about this part? The like, it'll all work out. Don't worry. It's a mystery. The like philosophy.
I love this philosophy because it is also my philosophy in life that like, it'll work out eventually somehow. I don't know how, but I find myself in daily life all the time just shrugging and saying it's a mystery and assuming that things will work out in the end. So that's my heart line from this play.
How are we friends? How?
And
his motto is, it will never work out. Trust me.
It'll never work out.
So anyway, he's like, things are going to work out. It'll be fine. And they're like, how it'll work out. And then I forget, like the town crier or something comes through being like, guess what? The theaters are open. The plague is over. So
hooray. No more plague.
That's how it works, right? Plagues just end. And then theaters are open again as order of the master of revels, but there aren't enough actors in the play. Will has promised roles to various, what are they called? The rude mechanicals in Midsummer Night's Dream. It's very much just like the like regulars from the pub. He's given roles to like various goofy people he knows, including Carson from Downton Abbey, who will play the nurse. But they need more actors. Where are they going to find more actors? Great luck. The Admiral's Men theater troupe comes by. I'm not sure why. And Ned Allen, played by Ben Affleck, is the leader of them. I believe you have some feelings about this, Allison.
I think this is Ben Affleck's finest role in his entire career. It is the only movie I've ever seen Ben Affleck in that I love him. And I laugh every time he comes on stage. I think the idea was like, the Admiral's Men are out on tour, so they can't be in this play. But then plague is over, they can act in the theaters again. So Ben Affleck comes back, like kicks the door down, strides into the theater like he owns it, and he's just like, what ho, I am here to act. And it's just beautiful. I love it so much.
And Lana, you mentioned his accent is the best of anybody's.
Well, it's the most accurate of anybody's because this is pre-vowel drift. So the group of people that eventually colonize Massachusetts take this vowel sound with them. So the way Ben Affleck, who is from Boston, talks is that Boston vowel sound is the sound, the accent that was predominant during William Shakespeare's time for the next 20 or so years. And then the posh people are like, we don't want to sound like commoners. So they start adjusting the way their vowels sound. And then the commoners are like, I can sound like that too. And so they start like the vowels start drifting to what we know as the British accent. So as far as like Gwyneth attempting a British accent and Ben Affleck attempting a British accent, Gwyneth is way off because she's closer to the modern sound, and Ben Affleck is dead on because he's just talking.
He's talking like if Shakespeare was in the drive-thru for a Dunkin' Donuts, and like it's gorgeous.
You gotta get your donkeys.
He's so good, and his haircut is intense. His haircut is like spray painted on. It's so short, and it's just like the what's it called? The like widow's peak. It's just like a V on his forehead. His hair is like, I don't even know, 2 centimeters long. He's so good. So he comes in. The Admiral's Men can be in the play. And he's like, what's the play and what's the main part? And I'll play it. And Will's like, the play is called Mercutio and you'll play the character Mercutio. And also Ned is the director, ?
He just has a lot of opinions, I think.
Okay.
He just wants to be important. There wasn't really like a director role back in these days because like the companies were owned by rich people who like could affect things however they wanted. So basically, they were just trying to put the plays on as much as they could before like their rich patron yelled at them.
Okay, yeah, because later on he's like walking around telling people what to do. So I'm like, oh, okay, he's the actor and director.
Which is another reason why Henslow would never have been like trying to raise a couple dollars to like put on a play, is because he had a patron. He could have just asked the rich guy for money. Sorry, not that soapbox now. But
so what's the situation then with the financier? So is the financier not the rich patron?
No, I get nervous when I see that guy come on because I'm like, ooh, a moneylender in Elizabethan England. That makes me nervous. That's not going to be a good character. But they do an okay job. But yeah, I don't know. I think they wanted a villain, and so they came up with man who works with money.
But then that villain ends up discovering the joy of the theater.
The magic of plays.
In one of the many montages, we see him just become transfixed. Oh, yes. And so cast as, I forget how this happened. I guess Will told Imelda, who told Gwyneth, but Thomas, quote unquote, has been cast as Romeo. She shows up in a chest binder wearing a boy's wig. And I need to talk about this because Gwyneth Paltrow's character is shown to have like waist length, like voluminous blonde curls. And then her boy's wig is like Ben Affleck's hair. Like it's the shortest short hair wig. There's a scene where, I forget, she tells her maid, she's like, you need to get me a boy's wig. And I'm like, do they just sell those? Okay. And
I
so
was like, do you know the local wig maker? What are you doing, Gwyneth? What's the plan here?
Right. So even if, let's say, although this is disproved later, like Gwyneth, like let's say the long blonde hair is itself a wig. People wore wigs back then. Maybe Gwyneth did have like really short hair or something. She's alopecia. I don't know. Anyway, there's no way all that hair could fit under that wig. And the scene at the end where the wig comes off is ridiculous.
I have watched that scene so many times, like trying to figure it out like a puzzle, like where is the hair coming from? I can't.
Anyway, so she's there, she's dressed like a boy, and she's added to her ensemble a tiny little mustache now too. So
it's also like it's confirmed later in the film to be a stick-on mustache, which I want to know where she bought that. Also, is there like a prank costume shop somewhere?
Ye oldie joke shop. And then so this is where we get into the sort of like, I like that they went to this level. They're not just like, wow, she's so good, let's cast Thomas Kent as Juliet. It's like, no, she's playing Romeo. Playing Juliet as a young man whose voice hasn't broken. And there's also hilarity about like, have your balls dropped yet? And he's all like, no, they haven't. It's cool. Even though the actor is clearly like 27 years old. So hijinks ensue. So they're rehearsing and Viola instinctively takes the ladies' part when they're learning to do the switching partners dance as part of the play, that sort of thing. Montage. And of course, Will is he's not falling in love with Thomas Kent. We'll get to that.
Which is infuriating to me. And that is my biggest complaint with this entire...
Okay, please go ahead. It's not... Okay, no, get into it. Because it's not like the Mulan thing where it's just like, no. Oh, I like this boy. Oh, you're a woman? That's cool too. It's like, he loves Viola, the woman who he sees. Thomas Kent is just this actor, but she loves him. Anyway, okay, please get into it.
This film could be such a beautiful, queer masterpiece. And instead, it ends up being the straightest thing on two legs, and that infuriates me a little bit on the inside because no one is like, there's so much gender bending, there's so much like men playing for women playing for men, and there's so much potential for it to be like interesting, and then it's just like, nope, he only loves her when she looks like a woman, and she only loves him in her capacity as Juliet, and like they switch all of the parts around at the end so that they're playing Romeo and Juliet the normal way. And I'm just like, it could have been so much more interesting than that. Even like Shakespeare's Twelfth Night is more interesting with gender than that. And I'm just like, if you got outdid by a guy 500 years old, like that, come on. But
did you read, everything comes back to the IMDb trivia for me, but did you read that Mark Norman's original treatment of this was that Will Shakespeare, married to Anne Hathaway, falls in love with a man, and that was the screenplay that Mark Norman wrote, and then it sat on the shelf forever, and then Tom Stoppard came in and he's like, but what if straight people? And then this is what
I did not know that, but that makes so much sense, because it's like it's a secret gay movie behind a straight movie, and that's now like that actually is. That makes me sad.
And that would work better too with the whole like, oh, I have a wife and children, but I can't stay away from this other person. That adds
also works great with canonically bisexual William Shakespeare, but wouldn't ask me.
Yeah.
I have in my notes, much like Romeo and Juliet, this whole thing would make way more sense if you're Aloe. Like if you're capable of falling in love with someone at first sight, I guess that makes sense.
Maybe.
Theoretically.
It also, like, it's not a good disguise. Like, Gwyneth is not in a good dude disguise. So if you're madly in love with her at first sight as a lady, and you have absolutely no attraction to her when she, like, kind of turns her head to one side and puts her hair up, I'm like, all right, I'm not sure if I can
even
really
know what she really looks like.
Yeah, then it's kind of like, it's the whole thing. It's like, are you in love with this person, or do you just like the idea of this person?
Yep.
And the fact that when she's in man disguise, he has no attraction to her whatsoever seems to speak to like, he doesn't like her as a person. He just is like, oh wow, look at this glittery person and like glittery woman in this gold dress. Like, she's so pretty.
And it only works because Shakespeare in this movie is such a himbo that like he doesn't even know that he doesn't know her as a person. Like, he's just a golden retriever going after a shiny.
Here's the thing. Joseph Fiennes sells this all with his performance. Like, talking about it, and I'm like, wow, so much is like could be better and is bad, but I'm like, but Joseph Fiennes, you're just like, he's a golden retriever. Like, I feel like he would fall in love with a ball bouncing on the street, and I would believe it because that's just what his character is. He's just like so full of passion. I've been reading various stuff for the next season of the podcast about various gender things with people. And there's sort of an assumption, two things. Okay, so sort of like the obvious assumption is like, well, gender roles used to be so like rigid that if like someone dressed like a man, you're like, I guess that's a man because a woman would never wear trousers. And it's like, well, no, because there were people. So that's like the first line of, and then there's other better historians who were like, well, no, actually, like things have always been fluid for kind of a long time, and like there were women who dressed like men, and people are just like, okay, it's cool, you're a man, okay. So the fact that he's just like, you're a man now, like this all takes place over what, 3 days, where it's like he meets and falls in love with Gwyneth Paltrow as Viola, then Thomas Kent is cast in the play. It's like you just saw her yesterday and you don't recognize her in this wig and mustache. Okay. Right. So back at Viola's home, Lord Wessex has declared that he's going to marry Viola in 2 weeks and take her to the colony of Virginia, along with the rest of his household, to oversee his plantation. Lana, yeah, we've discussed this. But now there's a ticking clock. It's 2 weeks until they're going to leave. And what we see end up happening is like they get married and then go on the ship immediately after is his plan. So,
what ship?
Sorry?
What ship?
The ship. Maybe one of the punts. Sort of like an Uber. So yeah, so Viola addresses Thomas, delivers a letter to Will from quote unquote Viola, saying Viola says you can't pursue a relationship with her, but Will will not be stopped. He chases her/him on the punts again, and then they have sort of a confession of feelings scene, which is her being like, I have feelings for you, basically, and then kisses him, and he's just like, what? I was kissed by a person with a mustache who is therefore a man? And then even the like taxi driver is like, oh, that's obviously Lady Viola. Like, that's not even a good disguise. I thought that was a good moment where the like punter is just like, clearly bro. That's like, come on, bro. Like, did you really not notice? I think he says, quote, a child could see through her disguise, and Will is like, wait, what? And then he chases after her and they have sex in her house. And afterwards she's like, wow, that's even better than plays. even your plays. And I'm just like, eee. And it's only my first try, she says.
Lying wildly.
Montage style, we see the play rehearsals progressing over presumably the next 2 weeks. This is like a movie with a short time frame. Will and Viola can't keep their hands off each other. They're making out, kissing all over the place, almost getting caught, etc. I especially note here, he hugs pillars while smoldering at her. That part, it's like he practically wrapped his leg around that pillar. He's just like, Josephine's so good. He's just like, so good. And then there's a scene where like Romeo and Juliet are kissing, and then Ben Affleck is like, oh, whatever, kiss each other. And then Will's like, no, here's how you have to kiss. And then he like gets up, and then there's like, and then they like say love lines to each other and kiss. And everyone's like, oh, okay, what's going on? Everything is going so well. The play is good. Everyone's like jiving. Even the money lender has fallen under the spell of theater. You see him just watching the plays and being like, wow, theater is great. Because at the beginning, he's like, I don't care. I'll just like take part of the proceeds. Ha ha ha. I like money. I see now how you were worried about this character, Allison. My having combined 5 characters into one made me not realize what his role was, actually. Anyway, but he falls under the spell of the theater. He doesn't just care about money anymore. Now he also likes theater. And then the play's title is now even Ben Affleck. He's like, bro, like, why are you calling this play Mercutio? Like, I'm not the main character. We should call the play Romeo and Juliet. And Will's like, yes. And I'm going to make it a tragedy, not a comedy. Everyone's like, what? But Viola still has to marry Wessex. But first they have to get permission from the Queen, ? That's rich people. Well, how many times have I done this on the podcast? Like, if the Queen doesn't approve your marriage, then you get thrown in jail. I did a whole season about that. So like, good for them getting permission. So they go to see Queen Judi Dench. And in sort of a moment of just like hilarity, Will is like, well, I can't let you go do that by yourself. I'm going to disguise myself as a nursemaid, which means just me, wear a maid costume and put like a bit of fabric across my bearded face.
And pick up the weirdest accent I've ever heard. It's a very Mrs. Doubtfire accent, which I don't know if he was doing on purpose, but
it is. You're right. It's very like, hello. Yes.
Catherine is on the way. It was very that. Yeah.
So he's like, I'm going to come along to this scene for plot reasons. So they, as chaperone. So they go to a fancy party. The Queen is there. And then Wessex asks Will, who's in disguise, as like, I think Wilhelmina. He's like, has Viola been visited at her house by a playwright? And Will is like, yes. His name is Christopher Marlowe. Don't worry. It
would have been so easy to just say no. Could have just asked, she been visited by a playwright? No, she has not. Like, that would have been fine.
You know what? Great point. Didn't think of that. Great point. So Colin Firth is just like, ooh, Christopher Marlowe has been like sleeping with my fiance. So then it's time for Viola to meet the Queen. Queen Judi Dench is like, why do you like plays so much? And Viola, the scene is wild. So Viola is like, I love poetry. And the Queen is like, but plays can't accurately portray true love. And Viola is like, yes, they can. Theater is magic. And then somehow, I don't quite follow, the Queen winds up taking a bet that a play can't show the true nature of love. And the sum is, what is it? Is it £50?
I think so, which is like shit tons of money.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's like the whole treasury right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So £50 that a play can't show true love. And also the Queen apparently is going to be the judge of this contest, date TBD. But now the pressure's on. Will's play, Romeo and Juliet, has to prove to the Queen that plays can accurately portray true love. So that just raises the stakes, I guess. And then the Queen, to Colin Firth, is like, Viola has had sex. I can tell by looking at her. And
which
Wessex,
is a thing that people can do.
Yeah, the Queen can tell. She's like, she's been plucked since last I saw her, I believe is what she says. And Colin Firth is like, Christopher Marlowe did this. So then Christopher Marlowe, speaking of, pops up again in the movie. And he tells Burbage, who's the... Right, so remember Will had to write a play for Burbage and also for Henslowe. And he's like, oh yeah, Will Shakespeare has given Romeo and Juliet to Henslowe. And so Burbage is mad at Will because he's like, no, he was supposed to give me a play. Rosaline, remember her, was, oh yeah, so this was another one of the, why is this in here? Just like fucking scenes. like Rosalind is just like, Marlowe comes in to talk to Burbage, and Burbage, like Rosalind is like actively riding Burbage, and Marlowe's like, hey, can we just talk about like the theater or whatever? And I'm like, okay. This is just a casual discussion while your like friend is like actively in the act of like having sex. Rosalind, is she thrown to the ground? Anyway, the snake bracelet breaks. And then out of the bracelet is the piece of paper that says William Shakespeare. And Burbage is like, what? But I thought you were my whore. I'm not sure. What happens? I don't remember exactly.
It is all very vague that his manhood has been offended in some way by Shakespeare because of snake bracelet? ? So
I'm not sure. The snake
Plot
bracelet
happens.
Plot happens, yeah.
Great. You know what? Great summary, Lana. Yeah, it's like the snake bracelet in Act 1 goes off in Act 3. So Burbage, who is just, I'm like, why? I mean, this movie is very much just like paint by numbers. Like, let's get our plot points in. Like, so now it's the part where Burbage is out on the hunt for Will. Like, I'd forgotten he was in the movie, frankly. So he enters the theater where Ned is leading rehearsal. Burbage challenges them all to a fight. So there's a big sword fight, which turns into, I forget exactly how, a pillow fight, and feathers everywhere. And then it gets very slow motion, and it's very like North and South, the British version, with just like the cotton flying and the slow motion and the smoldery looks. And then Viola and Will hide under the stage. And they have a tender moment where Will says he had a dream she was in a shipwreck and got stranded. And that's just laying some foreshadowing for later. I forget who wins the fight. It seems like they all just kind of fall asleep or something like that. And then afterwards they go to the pub, where I wrote, populated by various Madame Thénardier looking wenches, because suddenly there's these like women with like big red curly hair and like white faces, and I'm just like, as a redhead, historically wenches always are shown as having red hair, and that's my representation in this movie. So to distract, oh yeah, and so the wenches are like, hey, so this whole thing about like, hey, Thomas Kent, which is Gwyneth in boy drag, they're like, have you whatever been plucked? And she's like, oh,
you dipped
no.
your wick yet?
Yeah, dipped your wick yet? And she's like, oh no. And then to distract, somehow Will is like, you, Mr. Fennyman, you can play the apothecary in the play. And he's like, okay, great. And then one of the drunken people reveals that Will has a wife and children. Viola storms out. She did not know that he's married already. Which I have to point out is exactly, I don't know if it's exactly, but it's like 1 hour, 23 minutes in this movie and in the movie Elizabeth with Kate Blanchett. The heroine learns that Joseph Fiennes' character has a wife. And gets really mad about it. Like the exact same plot point in both movies, both 1998, both Joseph Fiennes, both Pantaloons.
I love that. And that even in The Handmaid's Tale, the fact that he has a wife is a problematic, upsetting plot point. So like maybe just don't ever give him wives.
Yeah, it's gonna lead to some sort of breakup of some relationship. So that's shocking. Viola storms out. Oh my God, I've been sleeping with a married man. I had no idea. And then news reaches them, even worse than this, Marlowe has been murdered.
So I'm thinking about to start singing a murder song there.
He's been stabbed in the eye. Yes? I'm looking at Allison. Yeah. Our expert on Kit Marlowe death. So Marlowe
did not involve Colin Firth in real life, can confirm.
Nor did it in this. So although it seems like Marlowe has been murdered, and then it's like, oh my God, Will assumes Marlowe is killed by Wessex because Will twice said that Kit Marlowe has been sleeping with Gwyneth. So then he feels so bad. He feels responsible for it. That was like his mentor. And I said, Will
everything is always about Will.
Always.
Marlowe doesn't have his own life or anything going on that might cause his death. It's clearly William Shakespeare. You know what? That's to the one-sided rivalry as well. He's like, oh my God, Marlowe was murdered. It must be because of me. And then he goes, I don't know how to get a plot. He goes and he does emo penance. This is like the most Joseph Fiennes-iest scene. He goes to the like darkly shadow lit chapel and he's on his knees like banging at his chest, and he's just like,
all but screaming, no, like he's just like,
It looks like an Evanescence music video for
yes.
like 45 seconds. And it's
yes. Will is just like, oh, what have I done? Oh no. And then there's a plot twist. So Wessex, God, what people say just as many words as needed to be needlessly confusing to each other. So Colin Firth reveals to Gwyneth that a playwright is dead, but he doesn't use Will's name, and she assumes he means Will, but he means Marlowe, who he thinks she's been sleeping with. And then they all go to church, and then it's the same church where Will is doing his penance, and then Will sees Wessex and like points at him, and Wessex thinks Will is a ghost. He freaks out. Little Easter egg for, I think, Hamlet. Yes.
think so.
Yeah. And then Viola sees Will, realizes he is not dead, and she forgives him for not telling her that she was married, because thinking he was dead made her realize how much she actually does love him. And so things are good.
Which is wild. The fact
Yeah.
that things are good right now. I'm
It
like, I would like to have a 4-hour conversation with you after that entire sequence of events. And she's just like, no, we're good now. Glad you're not dead.
Yeah, she's like, I'm okay. Like, you're married, but you know what? We love each other, and I'm going to Virginia to with the rest of my fiance's household to oversee his plantation. I just like saying that to see Lana's face. So we only have like a week together, so let's just like do this or whatever. Wait, but something made me think of something. So he does penance, a player's dead. Oh yeah. I think this was in the IMDb trivia. I love that you didn't see it, Allison, because they said like it's sort of an inside joke that the fact that Colin Firth's character is so just like out of touch with like all of society that he would be like believe that Christopher Marlowe was sleeping with Gwyneth when Christopher Marlowe was like everyone knew was gay.
Yep. It's like, oh, this is not working out for you for a number of reasons, Colin Firth. You are wrong on so many levels.
And I kind of like that as a subtle Easter egg. The fact that he even
Easter egg, yes,
indirectly. Okay, so it's back on, the affair back on. So they're kissing in the theater. It's secret again, but this time it's like sad making out because they know she has to leave in a week with Wessex to Virginia. But this time, Lil John Webster, who has been in this movie all along, I forgot to mention, sees them, notably the breasts of Gwyneth, aka her bubbies. So can you talk about John Webster, either of you?
John Webster is my baby boy, and I love him. He is also the Easter egg for every English major in the house, because John Webster was like a playwright the generation after Shakespeare, and like his plays are that shit. Like they're wild, the bloodiest, most upsetting things you've ever heard of. Like it's gross. And so like when they introduce him as a little kid in this movie, he's like feeding a mouse to a cat. He's just like, I like the plays where everyone dies. And we're like, yes, you do, John Webster. We know that.
Yeah, there's a part at the end after the performance of Romeo and Juliet where the queen is like, did you like this play? And he's like, I like the part where they all got stabbed. And truly, I've never read John Webster's plays, but I always think of just always forget if it's him or Ben Jonson in this movie. But I'm just like, oh, that kid from Shakespeare in Love. Good for him. Do you remember? You might not know this. In an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, where they go back to olden times San Francisco, and Mark Twain is there, but their bellhop is Jack London, and he's like, "Oh boy, I'm Jack London, and I'm gonna write books one day. You'll see." And then whenever I hear about like White Fang and stuff, I'm like, "Oh, from Star Trek, Jack London."
He was the very first grimdark writer. Like that's where grimdark comes from, is Count of Maldonado.
John Webster.
Yes, John Webster.
I feel like I need to read John Webster plays because, as I've told you both, my favorite Shakespeare play is Titus Andronicus.
And John Webster's play has a werewolf in it, which is my fun fact. So we'd pick that one up.
I love it. I love his inclusion in this movie. So he is the one. But the other thing is he, out of revenge, because he was going to play Juliet in the movie, in the play, Romeo and Ethel, the Pirate's Daughter. But then he was fired when Ben Affleck and co came on. So John Webster mad at them for firing him. So he sees them kissing, realizes that Gwyneth is a woman because of, I would say, the I don't know. Gwyneth Paltrow's breasts are in this movie to an extent where you're like, oh, this was produced by Harvey Weinstein. Yeah, I'm sure it was.
It explains a lot about the Rosalind character too. You're just like, oh yeah, you see the Weinstein name at the end, and you're like, that explains a handful of things.
Yeah, exactly. So he sees Gwyneth's breasts, as do everyone who sees this movie numerous times. And then he goes to tell somebody about that to get them in trouble. Anyway, but before that happens, so Wessex charges into rehearsal because he's like, wait, Viola's been fucking with Shakespeare, now with Marlowe. So he wants to duel Shakespeare with swords. I made the point here. They're both in giant pantaloons. So it's just a big pantaloon vs. pantaloons. Sword fight, it ends in a draw. Wessex leaves. But then Mr. Tilney, the master of revels, enters and shuts down the rose for lewdness because there's a woman acting on stage. And he found out because Lil John Webster reported seeing her bubbies. I remember strange and specific things about this movie, but one of them is like, I saw her bubbies. I saw him kissing her bubbies. It's like, I wish I didn't remember that, but that is a line that I will never bleach from my brain.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Anyway, so they're all like, that woman is a woman. And then the guy who's playing Julie is like, me? And then Carson from Downton Abbey dressed as a woman is like, me? And then John Webster sends one of his trained rats, ? After Gwyneth, and she's like, ah. And then this is the scene where she accidentally removes her boy wig, and waist length hair extensions come pouring out, and everyone's like, oh my god, she is a woman. None of us knew that. And the play is canceled because the theater is shut down, and Viola can't play Romeo anyway. So this is an all is lost trademark moment to those familiar with plot arcs. But then Burbage arrives, and he's like, Will Shakespeare has a play, I have a theater, the curtain is yours. So they're allowed to put their play on in his venue, and then as per Henslow, it all works out somehow. It's a mystery. So we're deep into the fourth act of this movie. Viola is married to Wessex, whose ships are ready to go to Virginia immediately after the wedding. Again, what ships? Is he not broke? Is that not the reason he's marrying her? Anyway, but this is just really tightening up the stakes. So Will runs broodingly in his pantaloons, like in The Graduate, to stop the wedding, to just be like, Viola! But he is too late.
It's one of his best running sequences in this movie. There are probably 8 or 9 of them. And I think this one, as I remember it, has the most moving pantaloon action and the least moving upper body action. So like his shoulders are rock steady the whole time, but his pants are moving like a sail in the breeze, and it's really delightful.
The pantaloon's truly moving hither and yon.
Indeed.
Anyway, but they were making, and I like this part too. Like the sequence kind of starts with somebody's pasting up a flyer for the play, and it's like this producer presents a production by this person and this person in association with this person, like Romeo and Juliet, a play by William Shakespeare. And at the bottom, it's like with Mr. Fennyman as the apothecary, because he's just like really excited to be acting now. Anyway, one of these flyers flaps across Viola and Colin Firth as they leave their wedding. And she's like, oh my God, the play's going on, but at the other theater. So then Imelda helps her sneak away to go and attend and watch the play. Where Will is going to play Romeo, because who else is around? Who knows the roles? Suspense, a character I forgot to mention from earlier, and I don't know why, because this is one of the parts that always gets to me. So there was a character who was cast in the show, but he has a stutter, and it's been sort of all along kind of played for laughs. But he's cast as the narrator, and then he steps out and looks at everyone. And it's this part where it's just like my heart is in my throat. I'm like, what's going to happen every time? And then he confidently is able to say the opening speech of Romeo and Juliet, and that always gets to me. But that's kind of the first sign of like, oh, maybe this play is gonna like work okay after all. But then further complications. The boy cast as Juliet his voice has just changed, so he can't act anymore. Lana, you're shaking your head. Is it because the actor is 28 years old?
It's a plot point. It plotted.
Yeah,
it did.
Yeah, he just can't talk. His voice is like, is that how voices change? Just suddenly you're just like, anyway. for like a couple weeks. He just can't talk. Anyway, so no one can play Juliet. And what will happen? And Henslow was right there. He's like, no, I'll be all right. I don't know how. It's a mystery. And Will is like, how? And Henslow is like, Murr. But what happens is, so he goes up in the audience, and then when he's in the audience, he sees Viola's there watching it, and he's like, wait, do you know that part? And she's like, every word. So then she gets to play Juliet opposite Will playing Romeo in this like gender essentialist, like man playing man, woman playing woman, but they get to like declare their love for each other.
I will say the gender of this is all very boring, but every time I go to a play, I am sitting in the back of the theater like, ooh, I know every word. I sure hope someone like Philip Henslow comes to the back of the theater and yells at me so I can come on and do Juliet. Like, it's still a dream. I don't care. Someday it'll happen.
Yeah. No, is to all theater kids everywhere are just like, wait, oh, the, I don't know, Lin-Manuel Miranda is like, I can do it. Anyway, so they act. It's amazing. The audience is very moved. The play is a hit. The crowd goes wild. But then Mr. Tilney, Master of Revels, shows up again. Oh, this is the part where it's like the play going well is intercut with Mr. Tilney marching very purposefully through the streets of London with his one single drop earring being like boobity 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 boobity. And it's like them acting dramatically, and then it's boobity boobity boobity. Anyway, so he shows up with his single earring, and he is like, I'm gonna shut down this theater too. You have a woman on stage. That woman is a woman. But then twist. Queen Judi Dench somehow snuck in to watch the play, even though she's wearing a truly gigantic, like Star Wars level, like 4-dimensional, just like giant anemone of a dress.
No sneaking would be happening in that anemone.
No like
way. And she also had like 4 lady-in-waitings that were also wearing like Nazgul cloaks to hide their dresses, and it just, there's a lot of logistics.
Yeah, it was a big reveal when all the black cloaks are all removed, and it's like, oh, the queen has been here all along, because I bet we all forgot the plot point. Can a play ever truly depict love? You know, she takes her job seriously and she wants to judge it. Anyway, so she snuck in, and she's like, I know Thomas Kent and he's a man, so guess what? It's fine. Don't shut down the theater. And also, a playwright has finally portrayed true love, so Wessex, you lost the bet. And then she's like, I like your work, Shakespeare. Let's talk later. Why don't you write something cheerful next time? Maybe for 12th night?
Bum, bum, bum.
So then Viola goes inside to say goodbye to Will, and they sort of tearfully brainstorm, what can his next play be for 12th night? Like, well, maybe a woman named Viola is the sole survivor of a shipwreck, like his dream from before. And then she leaves, and Will gets to work writing, and we see imagery suggesting that Viola's ship maybe did shipwreck, and maybe she will now not go live with the rest of Colin Firth's household on his plantation in Virginia, but she will chart her own course and maybe enact the plot of 12th Night, but in real life. I'm not sure. What do you think the ending means?
I saw it as like, that's what Will is going to imagine happens to her next. He doesn't know. After he gets on the ship and sails away, she's out of his life. She only lives on to him as the character in the play that lives through all of those things, which is like fine. I would rather have seen the shipwreck where Colin Firth's pantaloons are just kind of bobbing in the Atlantic by themselves at the very end.
You know what? Pantaloons become like a life vest, and actually he survives. Because
I just figured she died. Like, I have Romeo and Juliet, like if that's romantic, then guess her dying is romantic. I don't know.
It is a weird idea that Romeo and Juliet is true portrayal of love. Like, no, that was 2 horny 13-year-olds who didn't talk to anybody. But...
Of all the plays to be like, you know what, that was, and here's the thing, in this film, the scenes, the way they cut it, like you see Gwyneth Paltrow, Joseph Fiennes, like emoting like hell. So you're like, wow, those two people really love each other. So I could see Queen Judi Dench being like, that was love. But right, the play itself is just like Romeo, like Shakespeare in this movie, is just like, I fell in love with everyone I see. Now we're both dead.
And then I stabbed people and now I'm dead.
Yeah. Yeah, the ending, I think, again, is like a young Shakespeare fan. I'm like, wait, her name is Viola? Oh my God. And I was just like, wait, were those plays really written in that order? Oh my God. It's like, no, this is a made up story. Like everything about this is made up. But Do you know the episode of Doctor Who where David Tennant and Martha meet Shakespeare? It's not good. But Martha, who is a Black woman, because it's like, was she the Dark Lady that William Shakespeare wrote his sonnets to? And then he's like, oh yeah, I have children. One of them is called Hamnet. And she's like, Hamnet? Ha ha ha. I don't know. Why is the love life of William Shakespeare of interest to anyone? Is it because like he wrote the mystery of like who did he write these things to?
I mean, he has like a bunch of I feel like Shakespeare kind of asks us to do this because he wrote so many anonymous sexy love sonnets that like he's kind of opening the door to a lot of speculation. And because he like left his wife for 20-30 years, like he was obviously up to something, and we put him on such a pedestal that we want to know like everything about him. We want to figure out all the answers, and people love to make up Shakespeare mysteries. So who was he in love with is, I think, another one of those.
Yeah.
It's not the plays. It's definitely not the plays. It's more the sonnets, because they're it's the same reason we explore Emily Dickinson and Jane Austen and all of that. Like there's same periods, similar movies, and then the more recent Emily Dickinson, because now we can have queer things again. That we want to know what drove people to have such big feelings. It's always like, it can't just be somebody's clever or creative. You want to know why they had those feelings, what made that happen. So I think that drives it a lot more than the plays do.
Yeah. And I guess with the plays are like, I'm going to write this and, make money for the theater company, whatever. But sonnets are just kind of like, I'm just kind of writing this poem. So it is seemingly more personal, I think, right?
Yeah, I think the sonnets, at least the first third of them, weren't they dedicated to somebody? Like he wrote those particularly. So those were definitely not like putting them up on stage in front of a couple hundred people. That was like, I sure hope this one dude reads my sonnets.
Yeah. Right. And so that's the whole mystery of like, who was the person you wrote them to? Was it a man? And I think there's something like it was dedicated to a man's name. I don't know. I didn't research anything. But that when I saw that thing in IMDb trivia about like the original first draft of this was about like William Shakespeare's gay awakening, basically, like he falls in love with a man. And I'm like, wow, that would be a good movie. Like Shakespeare in Love is a movie I enjoy a lot. And also, I think a queer Shakespeare movie would be really interesting.
Yes, I would like to see both of those movies so much.
I don't know how to wrap this up because we're not like scoring it. I'll ask you both, would you recommend people watch this movie if they have not seen it before? And if they listen to this like 2-hour discussion of every minute plot point?
I would recommend it going in knowing that you're going to watch something that is goofy and fun. This is not a kind of historical drama. You're going to go in and be like, yes, I learned so many things. And the production value was so high. You're going in because you want to watch Joseph Fiennes like drape himself over a pillar in fancy pantaloons. And like some days that's all you want out of life. So
yeah.
I think it has a lot more reminiscent value than it has like to actually watch the thing. I don't know if modern me would have enjoyed it in any way, shape, or form, but past me, like the nostalgia of that time period. I think if it's on streaming and you have nothing else going on, it's probably worth it.
The thing that aged worst to me, I would also recommend this movie, I think, to people who think they would like it, but the like hilarious, like the dick jokes are just like, oh come on. And then the entire treatment of the Rosaline character is just like, is this what we're doing? Like,
I will say the Rosaline character is bad. Like that didn't age well. The dick jokes aged about as well as Shakespeare's dick jokes aged, which is like, I didn't mind that. I was like, I saw what you're doing. I see you're like laughing at Shakespeare's dick jokes by making equally shitty dick jokes. But like, would I be laughing uproariously in the aisles? No.
I think to me, I was also, when I was watching, I'm like, wow, like, because I really liked this movie when I first saw it. And now just how my tastes have evolved, I'm like, it's rare that I would watch a movie that has this few women characters in it and this like proportionately. Like, there's Gwyneth, there's Imelda, there's Rosaline, and there's the Queen, I guess, the Queen who's in the movie for 2 minutes. Like, it's so many men with beards. And I have just developed a lack of capacity to watch movies about a bunch of white men who all look the same. I just like can't care about it. But which is not to say, I don't know.
No, that's a valid point, because I think I have such a personal, deep emotional connection to every single one of these men with beards, because like this is my period of research. So I will qualify my recommendation by saying, if you are an English major nerd in any way and like this is your jam, this is a warm hug of a movie in that way. Does it hold up as high cinema? Maybe not.
Well, no, and does it? My favorite movies are not high cinema at all, so that's not the benchmark that I'm looking to it for. I think it's interesting. It's so weird that Gwyneth Paltrow was the most famous person at the time that this movie came out, and then she then went on to win the Oscar, which arguably was Harvey Weinstein's. Inarguably was Harvey Weinstein's influence over Kate Blanchett and Elizabeth. But watching it now, Joseph Fiennes just steals the show. Like, to me, this movie is worth watching just to see what Joseph Fiennes is doing. He's like, it's such a performance. It's like, I couldn't believe that he was not the one who was winning all the awards, because he just like gets it. Like, he sets a tone for this movie. It's like the Joseph Fiennes show. And I found that enjoyable enough.
Strong agree.
Do you want to excitingly decide now what movie we'll watch next?
Ooh, live on air decision. I like it.
Lana, you'd mentioned Amadeus.
Yeah, I suggested that because that's more my wheelhouse.
Oh no, and that's what I really want. Like, some of these episodes are going to be like none of us have seen it before. Some will be like one or two of us. Like, yeah, so it's all just us experiencing.
Also, it's hilarious. That guy's laugh.
Okay, so the thing with Amadeus, I guess I could save it for the Amadeus podcast, but so there's an episode of Gem and the Holograms where she goes traveling back in time to various different time periods. And she meets people whose names are slightly like, she meets like Lena Lerner, who's like not Tina Turner. And she meets like Kenny Goodman, who's like not Benny Goodman. Anyway, she goes back to Mozart times. And that episode was around the same time Amadeus came out, and she meets Mozart and he just laughs hysterically the whole time. So like from an early age, it was imprinted on me, like, this is what Mozart was like. He was a guy who had this high-pitched laugh. And then I later learned, like, oh no, that's just Amadeus did that. And then Gem and the Holograms was like, this is a popular thing. Let's put this in the show for 5-year-olds. So I haven't seen it forever. I know that people wear like punk wigs, right? Don't they have like pink hair and stuff?
I mean, that was Habsburg stuff. It was high Habsburg doing their mostest.
Okay, I will preface this by saying that 1, I've never seen Amadeus, and 2, I have purposely refused to learn anything about the Habsburgs up until this very moment. So I will be coming in with vibes and very little else. But I am looking forward to that.
Here's the thing as well. And Lana knows this all too well. I am incapable of learning anything about the Habsburgs because they keep coming up in stories, and I'm just like, God damn it, the Habsburgs again. I'm just like, I don't want to have to learn.
They're everywhere.
Every story, and it's like, and she was like, your grandparents were Habsburgs. So I'm like, no, why are they everywhere? But I've never actually researched an actual Habsburg, so this will be good. This will be educational for me as well. So yeah, let's call it. We'll do Amadeus. Will be our next one, and it'll be a good pairing, I think, of like artistic person, famous, creative person. What was their personal life like, etc.
Mm-hmm. And it's that reality versus the portrayal, and like it also won Academy Awards.
And I think, yeah, who's the guy who plays Salieri?
Oh, great. Christopher Lee?
F. Murray Abraham.
F. Murray Abraham.
Oh, you got me excited that Christopher Lee was going to be in it.
No, sorry, F. Murray Abraham. He was amazing.
I think he was the one who got a lot of the awards and things. The guy who plays Amadeus he does the voice of Quasimodo in the Disney Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yes, which was in my book.
I love the Disney Hunchback of Notre Dame. And that was one where I was like, Tom Hulce from Amadeus can sing too? That was...
Isn't it Hulse?
Maybe?
I think it's Hulse.
Tom Hulse. Anyway, okay, so that's a plan. That will be our next episode. Whenever we do it, that'll be our discussion. So people can like watch ahead if they want to like prepare themselves. Thank you for joining me on this fun adventure.
Thanks for inviting us. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. It was really exciting. I didn't have a lot to say, but I enjoyed being here.
I was looking forward to this literally all week. Like literally since we planned it, I was just like, when are we going to do it? And so it's perfect. Thank you so much. So again, if you want to hear more episodes of Vulgarpiece Theatre, those are all going to be on all available through my Patreon, which is patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter, where you can pledge some money and you can hear that. And also So This Asshole and other things you get from pledging there. But this isn't, I feel weird just being all like, join the Patreon. So I'll give you some news as well, which is that I am hard at work researching the next season of Vulgar History, which is like season 5, I think, ? And the theme for that season is going to be Vulgar History Internationale, Scandiliciousness Without Borders, Tits Out Sans Frontières. And we're going to be looking at stories of people from various different countries. Spoiler, none of them are England. So we're going to be looking at lots of really interesting stories that I'm really having so much fun learning about, and I can't wait to tell you. And I'm hoping that season will start ideally the beginning of March. So stay tuned. I've got another special episode coming up for you in a little bit, sometime in mid-February. But until then, keep your mask on and your tits out, and I'll talk to you soon again, promise.
I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I'm the host and creator of Only One in the Room podcast. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's incredible Only One story. We talk to the realest of real people, dealing with issues like infertility, addiction, human trafficking, and body shaming. Oh, and we want to be fair, so we talk to some celebrities too. Oscar winners, New York Times bestselling authors, supermodels, and even the most decorated U.S. Winter Olympian. Everyone is invited to share their Only One story with our listeners. This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone. Download Only One in the Room wherever you listen to podcasts today.
Contained herein are the heresies of Radolf Buntwine, erstwhile monk turned traveling medical investigator. Join me as I study the secrets of the divine plagues and uncover the blasphemous truth that ours is not a loving God, and we are not its favored children. The heresies of Radolf Buntwine, wherever podcasts are available.